Okay, yes. As Robbed by Vanguard pointed out, excellent name by the way, this is a show that will not die except for yesterday. We don't talk about it. that's the that's the intro that runs
I
on
tried.
loop. Yeah. But yeah, so today hopefully it will not die. I have a backup if something happens, and we'll make it work because we don't have hard outs today really that are functional. I do, but it's like much later. In any case, a lot of stuff this week. Very fun, enjoyable things. Also, I'm still sitting on a box. My chair actually came yesterday, and I could have set it up, but I got home last night and I was like, I'll do it in the morning. And then in the morning, as things happen, it's like, nah, it's not worth it. All right, I'm going back to bed. Good
Nice.
times. So yeah, no chair, but hopefully a chair next week. Hopefully I'm not that lazy. That would be very distressing. Um, yeah. So anyway, very long intro. By the way, one last thing before we get into stuff. If you saw that an episode from, I actually think it was 2022. I think someone said it was 2020, but I'm pretty sure it's 2022 because I don't think I had that overlay in 2020. Um, if you enjoyed that one, it was just like randomly private on my YouTube, and I was like, why not? And I didn't realize it would just notify all of the YouTube subscribers. So I got a lot of comments
Why?
like, what?
Okay. I was
What is
really,
that?
I, I was actually really confused about that, but then
Mm.
just ignored it 'cause I thought it was a bug or
Yeah,
something.
no, I was just like, why did I never make this public? And then I just made it public because I thought, oh, it's like old. I'd already uploaded it. It's been in the
Yeah,
YouTube for like 2 years. Whatever. Hopefully you guys
fun.
got a kick out of that. It did surprisingly well for viewership wise, all things considered. But yeah.
Two,
So
two old episode. Good shit.
so administrative stuff out of the way. There's a lot of administrative stuff obviously because it's a very technical production. LCS Finals. We started talking about this before we got cut
They
off yesterday.
happened.
Yeah. So I want to hear your reaction first because I've talked too much. So
Um, so for overall finals weekend, uh, I I don't know if you want to talk about because it's hard for me to separate like me personally and my work performance from what happened only because I cast the game leading into it. Um, it was really cool. It was a really cool venue, especially where the casters were. It was a very, very fun setup. Um, the I didn't know we were having audio issues until after the entire cast, because I was not checking because of my mental. In case people think I suck, I don't check the live thread or anything. Um, as for the gameplay, I thought that it would maybe be a little closer. If you've paid attention to this podcast, you know that both me and Kelsey have been, I would say, higher on FlyQuest than a lot of people throughout summer split. Because I think, especially with how well C9 did in the regular season, people were seeing FlyQuest as like the shaky third of the three top teams. Whereas I thought their map movement, especially their push to lane swaps, was much better. Um, but they absolutely destroyed 100 Thieves. In particular, I think the second game, where, and again, this is something that I think hopefully is a lack of experience thing more than anything else. I thought FlyQuest did a really, really good job of playing the map combined with the fact that Sniper kept grouping with the team as Jax. And it got to the point where he was not catching so much sidewave farm that Whippo was so far ahead of him. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, I did expect 100 Thieves to lose. and I expected them to have a more difficult time against FlyQuest than C9. But even that being said, I didn't think it was going to be as one-sided as that series was. And then getting into the finals, people have said this before, but I think it's such a fitting end to the like solo LCS era to have a game be decided by that small of a margin, and minions. I think it would have been a lot tougher for FlyQuest had they gone to game 5, because that's a really rough loss to take. And yeah, it was a really, really good time. The atmosphere was great. I thought the finals themselves were super interesting. I was glad that it was TL and FlyQuest, because I feel like these have been our two top teams and they've been battling each other all year. And so to kind of see the reverse of what happened in spring, where TL were the favorites this time and FlyQuest were the underdogs, and have FlyQuest come up through the lower bracket. I know it's kicked off an entire lower bracket discussion, which has been interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I just I came out of the weekend feeling really good and feeling like we have two very interesting teams, in particular in our two top teams of FlyQuest and TL, that we're sending to Worlds. I'm also glad, as one final thing, that I didn't fuck up the last call, because Jat was on stage doing the interview, and so I was tasked with doing the like outro. And thank you to Graham, one of our producers, for helping me get the timing right as FlyQuest were coming up the stairs of the trophy. And I didn't fuck it up. I don't think it was the best ending call, but I didn't biff it completely. So I'm happy about that as well.
Okay, so for those of you new to the show, that is Emily speak for "I fucking killed it," and that's basically as good as you ever get from her. So we're just gonna go with that. All right, let's go on to I guess a couple things I want to talk about there, which is one. I think the just happy to be here vibes with 100 Thieves were just like off the charts, to be honest. Like, I didn't expect much from them, but I think in reality they didn't expect a whole lot either. But they were very kind of like, we got wrecked, whatever, you know. I think the sniper line was embarrassing, you know.
Yeah.
I just kind of laughed about it. I think they'll be fun at Worlds. I'm like, I don't have huge I know a lot of people are higher in expectations than NA this year for Worlds, and we'll talk about that probably in a later episode. But I mean, I'm not super high expectations for NA at Worlds, but I think 100 Thieves will have a fun time. They'll be enjoyable to watch. If they go 0-6, whatever. I guess you can't go 0-6 anymore. Whatever the equivalent is, who knows? So yeah, that's fun. I was watching, so I watched the finals the first time live, kind of like tabbed out while I was at work. And then, oh wait, no, it's Sunday, so I wasn't at work. Not the final. It was the 100 Thieves series that I watched that out. The 100 Thieves, or the FlyQuest, those teams. FlyQuest, Team Liquid, whatever. Those teams I watched live, and then I watched the second time on VODs, and it was like the moment, the minion thing live feels very exciting, but if you go back and watch the VOD, you're like, this is actually kind of anticlimactic. Like, they're all pushing down mid, and it's like, oh, they're just minions killing the enemy base, I guess. It's a good time. But the game was the only reason it feels that way, though, is like in the context of the game, it was so close, and it kind of feels a bit like a letdown that there wasn't like another big fight or something like that turned it. I don't know. But it was definitely enjoyable. I think the player reactions made it. I think if you like that kind of entertainment, it was good. And live, it was like a really good time. And maybe part of the reason it was a letdown is because I already knew the ending. So It is one of those. So yeah, but I think like what I would like to talk about a bit is the lane swap thing. And the reason why people are excited about NA this year is because they actually have something that they're good at. And the fact that our two best lane swap teams were in the finals, I think is a differentiator that people don't want to say because they hate lane swaps. But I think that's actually what people are excited about. Like, if they have to be honest with themselves, it's kind of how I feel. Even though we didn't really get lane swaps in finals. I don't remember. Was there a game? I don't think there was.
Think
Oh, they
really,
did matching actually. They did matching
yeah,
swaps.
yeah. They really wanted, because they basically wanted to get T's Lilia ahead, really similar to the first time these two teams met when they did the swap in game 5. And it was on the basically like on the weak side of the jungle, so T got like super far ahead.
Yep.
FlyQuest called it this time, so like again, you could also see the evolution of these two teams like know each other really well, and it's also cool to see FlyQuest obviously learn from that thing and immediately recognize like this is a comp that they're going to want to lane swap with. We've seen this before, etc. So that was really good from them. And, you know, even if the swap had gone through, I think Garen is super good in swaps anyway. We've already seen that come to fruition in LCK. But yeah, it's I'm curious to see how because I know people don't like lane swaps. I do. I also think, actually, it was funny. I was talking to Chad at the NACL finals about this because he's also a lane swap enjoyer. So shout out to Chad Jungle. But I think it's also partially a broadcast thing.
It's kind of more fun for jungle.
He said that
it's more fun.
He was
for
like
jungle.
he was like you get to do a lot of creative things as a jungler in a lane swap situation. But I think I was kind of glad to be on, because again, I'm like a very fledgling color caster, but I was glad to be on so many lane swap games because it gave me time to talk about why this is cool and what can happen and like why we're doing this outside of the very basic we're swapping away from a certain matchup or we're trying to fast push turret plates, which are kind of the older versions of what we've seen from FlyQuest and TL swaps more recently, which is a lot more about, you know, or how are you affecting midwave and like what kind of XP are you trying to get on your side laners and like where is your jungler, to the point where jungle can be super creative in these things. Again, the initial TL swap in game 5, not in the finals, but in the first time these two teams met, was with both T and Inspired on the weak side of the jungle. But since T was prepared, he got super far ahead on Lilia, and that was a very key component of like why that swap was so good. And I think I'm curious to see how this does at Worlds. I know we're going to have a Worlds preview like in a different episode, but because of the changes that are coming down on that patch, I am uncertain as to what lane swaps are going to look like and or if they will even happen. And once again, not just saying this because I like lane swaps, but it does always, and I know they don't want them for Worlds, right? Like Riot does not want lane swaps to be a primary strategy in the game. They've said as much. The sentiment has said as much. But it does always annoy me. And I know this doesn't bother people generally as long as the games are good at Worlds. But it does always annoy me when teams are qualifying and the game itself is very different than what ends up happening at Worlds because of changes they make going into the tournament. I don't think anything is as bad as the initial lane swap changes that happened or the Juggernaut patch, but it still always kind of like rubs me the wrong way when it looks like the Worlds patch is going to be so radically different than what every team in the world qualified on to get there, especially with how the meta has stayed relatively similar throughout summer. So, I mean, I do think it will affect TL and FlyQuest, who have had lane swaps as a primary strategy.
I think I remember in 2016 the wording was like, because the Juggernaut patch happened the year before that, right? They said we want to roll out this patch before like playoffs and qualifiers, right? That was the thing. And I remember if you could probably find it on like Wayback Machine when we were both at the Score, I remember writing an article based on like the laning of the teams that basically correctly predicted who would go to Worlds based on the lane swap change. And it was like Fnatic were top 3 at the time, and I was like, they're gonna get 6th place playoffs like first round, and they did because they were so reliant on like Reckless and Yellow Star, getting like not having a bad lane phase. It was a banger. Good times. Anyway.
You know what I'm bitter about? KT. Unironically, KT did not make Worlds that year
because of lane swaps.
It was such a better patch for Samsung.
Mm-hmm.
And they got destroyed in the regional.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
China was like, "What the fuck is this shit? We don't care." Anyway, yeah. One other thing, I think like the finals did help me kind of solidify the strengths and weaknesses of TL Fly, and I think you were talking about the 100 series, but I think Fly's mid-game map rotations are actually better than TL's. I think what TL are really good at is their lane understanding how to play creeps based on jungle position. I think that's what TL are just super good at. And that's like partly because they did lane swaps and they had to really pay attention to wave management or whatever, but you watch and it's like very synchronized. Like if Unti is here, we don't play up. If we know that enemy jungle is showing top, we are playing like Psychopath on this side. We get a lot of advantages that way. It's like a very basic thing, but it's a little kind of hard to coordinate in game. Because if you yourself as a laner don't really understand jungle positioning and pathing, then you have to kind of constantly either have a jungler who's always updating you on what enemy position is, or you have to ask perma, which clogs comms. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just like really drilled it, because obviously Core and Impact have been playing for so long. They probably know how jungle works. But it's like very fun to watch. Like I thought that Nasa's first pick game was a disaster. But I mean, they like quad was extended mid and they capitalized like very cleanly. Like it was actually well done, and they just snowballed through the lane phase, which was really good. So really enjoyed that kind of dynamic, because I actually thought FlyQuest were playing side lane macro a lot better, and I think that's like a huge growth point for them, especially comparing to them to like their form at MSI. So it was an interesting series for me. I think a lot of it was just like weird bloody things happening, but there were also like points that were fun to watch from I like lane swaps, so I'm happy when not everything is just dragon fights. So yeah.
Also liked, again, I pointed out the called swap in game 4 for this reason, but I just like that we had these two top teams that were constantly pushing each other all year. Mm-hmm. It's always really fun for me as a analyst and also just as a spectator to watch that unfold, where you have these two teams that are actively making each other better and like really pushing each other. I think that's always a good state to be in. And even when everyone, myself included, was super, super hyping up TL themselves were just like, don't count out FlyQuest specifically, because apparently in scrims. They were that like FlyQuest was always the team that gave them the most trouble. And it's interesting because other teams would say that as well to me.
I mean,
that FlyQuest in scrims was the most troublesome team to go up against. So that's cool too to always hear, because again, like if you have two teams that are constantly trying to outdo each other, I think naturally they're going to evolve, and that's going to become like a really good feedback loop for both of them. So it was nice to see that throughout both splits of LCS this year.
And at least like I think, I mean, across both teams, there are definitely scrim players, TL and Fly. So I imagine their scrims are like super fun, super interesting, and in some cases probably higher quality games than their stage games, just because there are a lot of stage players on both teams. Though there are also, I know at least two who are not stage players as well. So maybe that balances it out. Who are stage players, excuse me. So most of them I would say are scrim players, and then there are at least a couple who are stage players. So they're, in some ways, like their scrims could be higher quality. So that they would probably be super fun to watch. The other, I mean, it's funny because consistently throughout the year, the teams that were always touted to me as like being good at scrims were like Fly, C9, and IMT. So
I love how IMT just always sneak in there.
It's a banger.
It's pretty.
We'll get to them, of course. Actually, we can talk about them now. I'm down, and then talk about no. We'll do that with the drama. Never mind, drama section later.
Yeah.
Drama section. Did we just say drama section? Anyway,
there's actually a lot of drama across multiple leagues.
Yeah,
mainly NA and China.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about HLE winning before. Like honestly, I think the more interesting stuff happens after we talk about the finals. For those of you who are bored right now, so you know, whatever. We're just gonna talk about the game for a bit, and then we'll talk about how everyone is killing everyone and LCS is dying and EDG has Scout in a room with like no water and food. I'm kidding. They don't. It's fine. Anyway.
We're going back to like post season 4 rumors. It's like they have now and Rookie in the basement.
In the coal mines. Literally I still sometimes like use that image that the Chinese fans made of like them in coal mine gear with like black splotches on their faces.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a banger.
Yeah. But yeah, HLE finals winning. I love how previous episode we're like, there's never been a case where the same team wins both spring and summer in all 4 regions, and then literally both LCK and LCS have different winners.
Are like, no, we will refuse.
It's just further proof that I'm actually just cursed. Anyway, HLE won. Very fun, very exciting. Our resident LCK fan, Emily Rand, will give you the details now.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I'd want to point out is that, and I've seen a lot of people saying this, but it is kind of true. If we don't have the insane pop-off moment from Viper's Ashe in game 1, you could theoretically be looking at a 3-0 out of the series. So that is like, it's really, I'd say it's like pretty rare that you can narrow down, because so much happens in like a League of Legends game. It's pretty rare that you can narrow down something to like this specific mechanical outplay helped really decide the fate of the series. But like, if you just go back and watch this Viper play, it's so good, man. Like, it's so good. I'm not even like, I would say, again, if you just literally heard me talk about lane swaps and like macro, and if you've ever heard me cast a lane swap and like how excited I am to see them come through and like explain it to people, Obviously, I'm someone who, just as an analyst, really likes talking about macro play as opposed to like micro play, which is, I think, very different than what most spectators want to see. But this play is like, it's just insane. Like his spacing is so good. It really, really, I think, changed the course of the series, because it did look like Gen G were going to win this game, and then with them locking in the next 2 games, that could have easily been a 3-0, right? So that's something I wanted to point out. I know the other big thing I've seen coming out of this series is the kind of Hayes choking narrative, which I think is a bit unfair, because he
Choking
had
is fake. No, it's not, but it's overused. Anyway, continue.
well, it's like, he had one bad series in a split where I think he's actually performed really, really well, and I'm not someone who was as high on him as other people, chronicler, going into a lot of this, because I did still think he made a lot of mistakes, and I know going into MSI, even in a lot of like Korean and Chinese fan communities, they were calling him a passenger to the rest of the team. I don't think that's actually been the case, but he did not have a very good series, especially in their closing losses. But I think like Gen G will recover and be fine. It was really great to see this HLE team who, again, especially in spring, it was kind of some of their losses were kind of frustrating, because you knew what the talent on this team is capable of. I also do think that the meta shifted just enough in Zeka's favor, where he has become a more well-rounded player, but what I know Zeka for, and what most people are going to know Zeka for, are these more like melee carries in mid lane. And so his Yone performance was like really, really good. And with Yone's stock rising in a lot of these compositions, as we kind of saw last night, we'll get into that in a bit. It's really nice to see him in a meta that is much more suitable for him and has these really specific carries that you just should not let him have, because he can take over a game on them. So also, for anyone that knows, I have been a Peanut enjoyer for a while, and I know it meant a lot to him to kind of get his revenge against the org that dumped him, right? Because they got rid of him for Canyon, which obviously does make sense, because Canyon is really good, but I think Peanut is a really good voice to have on a team. A lot of people have said this, and it was cool to see him get his little revenge in finals. That was pretty great, and this sadly stops all of the Gen G Golden Road narratives I was preparing for Worlds. So I'm gonna have to go back to the drawing board as to how I want to talk about these teams. Just joking.
No
but
Golden Road this year. Woo!
It's another year. And I also do think it points out, once again, how difficult it is to do that, right? Like how consistent you have to be across every single domestic split and international, and be able to stay at the top across multiple meta shifts. I still think Gen G will be a favorite to win the World Championship. Still think they're obviously an incredibly strong team. And despite the fact that I think they're also a really good lane swap team, I don't think the eradication of lane swaps is going to affect them nearly as much as it's going to affect, say, Team Liquid and FlyQuest, which we just talked about. So, and then I also think, again, certain meta shifts could favor Hanwha Life further going into Worlds. We'll have a Worlds preview to talk more about this. But yeah, it was a really, really fun series, and I recommend, if people haven't seen it, that they go back and watch it. Or I guess just watch the insane clip of that Viper play and maybe some Zeka highlights if you want just to see some like really, really good mechanical prowess from players.
And LCK Global has 10-minute highlights of every single match if you're really strapped for time. Yeah, I think a couple things. I feel like this is going to sound revisionist because last year I said ruler, so that's why I went back and look at VODs. I think Viper has just been the best ADC for like 4 years in a row. Because I did go back and look at 2023 VODs because I remembered I was kind of like on the ruler train. And obviously ruler had a much better performance last year, but I feel like he's just low-key been the best ADC. Because I remember, like, I first did, like, a deep dive look at his mechanics and his team fighting in particular, which I always value more than a lot of other things when I'm evaluating AD carries. And end of 2020 was like, wow, this guy is actually just on another level. I can't even remember. What team was he on in 2020? Was it like that really janky Griffin roster, or what was the 2020 team? I'm trying to remember. I know his team was bad. But
isn't it? No, it was HLE. It was
okay. Yeah.
It was the jank HLE team. Not to be confused with HLE team.
Yeah, but I just remember there are just like some fights where it's like he's actually just movement predicting like so many random things that people are doing, and like you can see him start to move before the action happens, and it's actually he's playing like he's fucking in the Matrix, playing like Neo in slow motion. It's actually crazy sometimes to watch it play. And obviously he won Worlds in 2021. 2022 I probably didn't watch him as much, so and then 2023 I went back and looked at VODs, and then this year obviously he's just been really good. So yeah, I don't know. Viper's been a really good player for a while. You probably were rake ups. That's what I said. I already said in 2023 I said ruler, but then I went back and watched VODs, and I actually think he's just been the best player for 4 years. Because I even already admitted that I was wrong, okay? Bro, like, you don't have to rub it in even more, you know? It's fine. It's just LPL bias. All right. Yeah, the other thing was, I feel like
regional
HLE did what you would want BLG to do to win, which is, like, play laning phase better and then not fuck up mid-game horrendously. But I don't know if BLG can accomplish that, so good times. We'll see.
No faith in BLG being able to accomplish that.
Yeah. Woo!
But the laning phase, maybe they can do that well.
I do want to save the LCK regionals for the end because it's fun. For me, at least.
Not fun for me.
So we can start the drama section.
Now it's drama time.
Oh yeah, drama alerts. Woo, banger. Where
do you want to start? LPL or NA?
I think we can start with the franchising stuff and then go into C9 and then transition to LPL drama, and then talk about LCK Finals at the end. All right, cool. Very clear plan. We love it. I have a way in my head that these transitions will work. Okay. So yeah, most shocking thing for me in this entire week is that IMT is reportedly leaving LCS. I have been dying on the hill all year that IMT will not leave. They will not be gone. They're the only financially sufficient team in the league. They will stay until the very end. And the only thing that I've seen that's been a convincing argument is allegedly there's maybe a conflict of interest with a Brazilian team. I don't know how true that is in terms of like their ownership group. That's the only convincing argument I've seen as to like why that might be the case. But I don't know enough about it. I just heard that there's like potentially a conflict of interest in their ownership group with a Brazilian team of some kind. I don't know. It sounds fishy to me because if that were the case, I'm pretty sure Riot would not allow it in the beginning. But that would be a reason why. Otherwise, like, I don't know. Maybe IMT is just taking the bag. Whatever. Good for them. NRG are definitely taking the bag. Pretty sure CLG gave them the spot for free. And they're just getting whatever the payout is and going, woo! So anyway, yay.
Made money off of, because like people were like, wow, NRG, like that's really surprising. And like from a fan perspective, it is, right? Because you have them coming in, taking over this legacy Oregon CLG, winning, right? And then making Worlds quarterfinals, and then keeping the same roster together. And even though, you know, they didn't make Worlds, you still had a little bit of a built-in fandom left over from CLG. And then also the fact that NRG themselves, like this lineup, made a lot of fans because of their performance. Not only with their finals performance, which I do think a lot of people did enjoy watching, because of a lot of the kind of redemption arcs for a lot of these players. But then also the fact that they did beat G2 at Worlds, the fact that they did make it to quarterfinals. And I'm pretty sure they made a lot of money off this as the work. And that's really tilting to hear as a fan in terms of peeling back, you know, like actually looking at like why do people enter a franchised league and like how does it work, and how people have a lot of the times like I feel like you and I have talked about this, especially in regards to, or at least I've talked about it in regards to like the way that old OGN champions used to work, where you put literally no money into your team and you're using it as a marketing arm for whoever you are. So Samsung, for example, SK Telecom, KT, etc.
Yep.
These are all like big companies. CJ Entis is another one that you're investing very little in order to get use this just as another marketing arm for your company. With franchising, you can essentially treat it, and it is still difficult to compare to traditional sports for a lot of reasons. You and I feel like could have an entire giant long conversation about like traditional sports franchising versus the way esports has worked and how it hasn't worked, because the only revenue streams available a lot of the times have been partnerships, and there's just not enough partners that's going to be able to cover bringing in any sort of revenue that's going to allow you to break even. But with a lot of these teams,
scheme it. Woo!
well, a lot of these teams essentially treating it not as a Ponzi scheme necessarily, but as a way to go through a round of like investment and then see, basically treat it like just another thing like cryptocurrency or like NFTs, or, you know, name something that people have tried to create, like and
I love
have
VC.
to some extent successfully created an artificially inflated market so that whoever enters first ends up making more money. And then anyway, as far as I know, with this deal, NRG did make a lot of money off of it, and it's sad now because you see so many people, not just the players, but like within the org, suddenly not have jobs, which is very frustrating for me to watch as an outsider. And then similarly to you, I actually wasn't sure, like I didn't know about NRG until it happened, pretty much, or like until the the big rumor came out. But with IMT, I wasn't sure. I didn't really want to speculate about it until, it happened. But it seemed like they were putting very little in, so their like overhead cost probably just was not as high, which like you was one of the reasons why I was like, maybe like people might be really mad about it, but like maybe they're not one of the teams leaving the LCS, because I thought the way they were treating it at this point in time was, again, very similar to how older teams, specifically if you look at the way that some of the older champions teams used to look at it, where it's like, this is potentially another marketing arm and we're not going to invest a ton of resources into this. And that will allow us to not operate at as much of a loss as other teams. And it could be just kind of considered a marketing investment. Obviously, this is a lot of speculation just based on like how the team was run. I don't know if this was their actual strategy, but yeah, apparently both NRG and IMT are leaving. I've seen a lot, especially from IMT staff, just posting how they have lost their jobs or their time with IMT has come to a close. There was a very funny and kind of sad moment where Dokla learned about the news live while he was streaming, and so immediately went to like jokingly try to learn Portuguese.
Oh God.
Which I thought was very funny.
Yeah.
So shout out to Dokla. That was like I feel badly that like if that is actually the way he found out, like it's really shitty. At the same time, it was kind of a funny moment, and he kind of made the most out of it. So shout out to him. But yeah, I mean, and then as a fan, I'll wrap this up because I've been talking for a while, but like as an LCS fan and someone who has watched the ecosystem forever, it is kind of sad to see this is the last end of CLG, right? And I feel like true CLG fans, of which I was not one. I don't really have like a LCS legacy team that I was a huge fan of. But that is kind of sad because it seems like it was already the end of an era when NRG bought them out, but now this is truly like the end of another legacy LCS org. Just sad.
I mean, the other element of it that I think might be surprising to people is there's a lot of evidence to support that if NRG hadn't won LCS last year, the downsizing would have been much more significant. I think them winning unironically like kind of saved player salary amounts for another year. So yeah, and I think so when I went into the season, when I heard that we were going to 6 or whatever, which I guess wasn't at the start of the season, I was pretty confident it would be Dig in 100, so I'm 0 for 2. But I think like Dig also had a very kind of last gasp roster, right? That didn't do that well. So I was like fairly confident that Dig won. I think 100 Thieves overperforming was maybe something you can evaluate, but I know like, for example, probably my guess is if NRG had not won last year and the 10 teams had stayed, the lowest paying teams would have been like EGGG, IMT, NRG 100. Probably. In terms of salary amounts. And if like 100 Thieves feel like this is sustainable and still like a good investment because they're getting to go to Worlds, they're getting to advertise to foreign companies, which is like what a lot of them care about, or a lot of them kind of like sell to their ownership and investment groups, then, you know, maybe to them it's still like a viable thing. So it's possible that some of the circumstances could have changed because 100 did unexpectedly well. Also, Nocturne Navi in chat mentioned that the conflict of interest potentially is the fact that the same ownership group of IMT owns MIBR and VCT, which
okay.
So that would be like if
I should have known that. I forgot about that.
If League is becoming America's, yeah. As soon as
Yeah.
he said that, I remember that that's what I had heard, and it does check out.
Yeah, thank
or
you for
he or
reminding us.
she or they. Sorry. But as soon as like that, I heard that and that checked out. It makes sense because it's like if it's becoming America's conglomerate, it's not technically VCT, but there is more potential for maybe collusion, conflict of interest, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can kind of see it, but also like there are teams that own a VCT team and an LCS team, so who knows? I don't know. Whatever. So good times. We'll see what happens. The other element on franchising stuff is, in general, drastic downsizing across the board. And we talked about this last episode because we talked about what is the impact of the highest paying team in the league losing or not making worlds year over year, effectively. And the impact is that salaries continue to go down because it's obviously not worth it to pay your players a ridiculous amount of money. I said that C9 is the highest paying salaried team in the league this year, and a decent part of that is JoJo. So that also came to a head this week.
Yeah.
Yay. I will let Emily start because otherwise this will just become me ranting like a crazy person. So we'll start with Emily.
Yeah. So I am actually going to defer to you on a lot of the like because Jojo a lot better than I do in terms of like what he's like in a team environment. I don't know that because I have not been on a team with him. However, I will say this. I think both things, like, it can be true that JoJo was chronically late for things, and at the same time, it can also be true that C9 is very much incentivized to dump this very large contract that they had, especially when it is a lot of it was the expectation was that the C9 team was going to make worlds. To your point in how we were just talking about the way that franchising works and the way that a lot of teams talk to their investors, like their investment groups, their partners, is that worlds is a really big part of the plan because that is a much larger market that you're then going to be advertising to. It's also theoretically larger like merch opportunities and stuff like that, where you have more avenues to potentially make money during that time if you make the world championship. So I know in a lot of like team, PowerPoints to investors and stuff like that, there will be an entire like, if we make world section, like here is our plan, right? And this is what we're counting on in terms of being able to advertise your brand to a wider audience. Ergo, this team, we kind of talked about like brand value for this team as opposed to like in-game performance. Is this a super team, etc.? I feel like that came up in multiple episodes when this team was formed. And then again in summer when Thanatos was added to the team. And you and I both said, okay, this isn't really going to fix their issues in game that they had in spring. However, I do think that C9 is very much incentivized to not want to have this giant contract going into next year. And I don't know the specifics of either. Again, there's still so much that I don't know that it makes me almost uncomfortable to like comment on it. But I don't know the specifics of JoJo's behavior, and I also don't know if that is actually a breach of contract. And obviously, I am not a lawyer. However, I do think that's what it's going to come down to, right? Is that
I am a lawyer. No, I'm not.
is whatever happened with JoJo being chronically late to everything, and how that behavior was documented. Because, like, I mean, the only thing I can draw on is like my experience as a retail manager, which is obviously very, very different, because if a player has hands and they make worlds, I feel like we're not even having this conversation, right? Because they would have already made worlds. So it doesn't matter as much. And you wouldn't even hear about it outside of maybe a few, like, inside jokes about how late he chronically is. But it wouldn't come to a head like this, where it's now potentially being seen as a breach of contract. And presumably that is going to be the sticking point for whether JoJo, because right now people are saying that he's off the team, he's not actually off the team, all this other stuff. And it sounds like, again, I'm not a lawyer, and this is a very outside perspective, but it sounds like essentially it would be up to C9 to prove that his behavior was in breach of contract, so they don't have to honor the contract. And in that case, again, the only experience I have anywhere close to this is as a retail manager, where in order to like fire someone, you a lot of times would have to like put them on a performance improvement plan first, or you at least have to have written documentation that this was like, a fireable offense, essentially. But yeah, it's all public, so people can now speculate about JoJo's behavior, about why C9 would not want to have to honor this contract, about how that's even going to work. With all of this out in the open, it's difficult, even if JoJo isn't in breach of contract, it's difficult to see how he would be able to come back to C9 at this point. But we'll see. And I will turn it over to you, someone who's been with JoJo in an actual team environment. Because I feel like that's all I can bring to the table, essentially, in this discussion. Because there's still so much that like we don't, or at least I feel like I don't know, which makes me very unqualified to comment on it.
So, there are a lot of reasons why I don't want to comment specifics publicly about how JoJo is. And I think the easiest one to say is, like, if I coach you as a player ever, I will have your back and die on that cross until the end of time. Like, people still know that I defend Fake God. So, I mean, he didn't have a great split, but like to me, he's still like good attitude, good base mechanics. He has his flaws that you can see from his gameplay, but I'm not gonna like trash talk him or say stuff that he wouldn't necessarily want people to know, right? So if you're expecting me to just like drag JoJo or to comment on like his personal habits, I'm probably not gonna do that. So sorry to let you down, but one thing I will say is a lot of people go into esports because they don't necessarily fit into the standard like structure of the world. And I'm talking about like 9-to-5s, like this. I work best when I get up in the morning and I have the same routine every day, right? These types of things. People don't always fit into that structure in esports, and you have to be very good at accommodating them, right? And there can be a bunch of different reasons for that. Some could be health related, some could just be like your brain does not work the same way, like neurodivergence is the same thing. So the big thing that I will defend is that, like, no matter what, Jojo was a very, very hardworking player. I pushed the campaign behind the scenes. I messaged like every LCS caster and journalist. This is why you should vote for Jojo for MVP. I was rigging the system. No. But like, it's definitely like last year, because like, I am a big Jojo advocate. He put in a ton of work, especially in off season leading up to it. And like, he was like a very, very hardworking player, and the way he worked wasn't always consistent with the way everyone else works. But he definitely, like, it's like ridiculous that the narrative is he has no work ethic, because that's not the same thing. I cannot say that, like, he was definitely not, well, I will say he was definitely not late 43 times on EG. That did not happen. So there is that. But also, that doesn't mean that a player doesn't change, right? Like, that doesn't mean that their habits don't change going into a new environment, within a new staff. Maybe he didn't fit. Like, a lot of people have been saying, like, C9 is more structured. I don't know how true that is, because, like, the argument people give is, well, C9 makes you pay for coffee for everyone if you're late. Literally every team does that, guys. Every single one. We did that too. It's not a structure. It's a good thing. I actually think it's good. That's why we do it, because the philosophy behind it is you are giving back to your teammates for wasting their time, right? Like, that's the philosophy behind it. You're not like getting fined your own salary to the org. You're giving back to your teammates, right? So that's like the philosophy behind the coffee thing. That's why it's good, but that's also why literally every team uses it, and it's not like a unique structure punishment that C9 have or NRG have or any team has. Everyone does it. So that's like another element of it. So now we're going to talk about the more far-reaching implications of this conversation. One is that people's image of how esports teams work is probably 10 times more professional and structured than it is real. And I've seen a lot of people make this argument. It's like, how does someone go late 43 times without being benched? If they're late 43 times and C9 didn't say anything, that's crazy. But it's like, I'm sure if that actually happened, which again, it didn't happen for EG, but it maybe happened for C9 because maybe he just changed and became a completely different person. Who knows? But like, if that happened, right, then you probably bring it up. Some people do not respond to like the same habit reinforcement comments or discipline mechanisms as other people. That's one thing. And the second thing is, it is sometimes very hard to bench players on LCS teams. And I think this is something that people do not really get, right? Is that they have this image of like an org owner backs up the coach says, this player's misbehaving, I'm benching this player, get me a new mid laner, whatever. What happens, that seems normal, that seems functional, that seems healthy, right? That seems like what a professional team would do. That's crazy. There are a couple of mechanisms why that doesn't work in LCS. One, there is a perception among players, orgs, and teams that the talent availability in NA is dog shit. And so if you bench a player like, we'll use someone else as an example, just because it feels weird just like constantly talking about the same player when this is like a universal thing. So let's say we have to bench, oh God, now I can't just literally any star player, okay? Like, let's say we have to bench Impact, right? Because Impact is like trolling and keeps like throwing paper at the back of his teammate's head, whatever. Let's say we have to, he was also MVP this year, so it's a decent comparison. Let's say we have to bench Impact for misbehaving. immediately the coaches and the players on the team will say, well, if we bench Impact, who's the next best top laner we can get? And then they'll be like, oh, like our top laner in NICL is Jenkins, and obviously TL will defend Jenkins to the death. But internally, they will say, you know, oh, but it's Jenkins. You know, like it's not Impact. There's just too much of a drop off. It's not worth it. Like whatever misbehavior Impact is doing, yes, it's irritating, it's bothering his teammates, but we're not going to bench him for Jenkins, right? Like that's a lot of the internal conversations that will happen. Sorry, Jenkins, I didn't mean to do that to you, bro. But anyway, like that's going to be like, regardless of what my perception of the player is, regardless of what the public perception of the player is, the internal perception will be that the drop-off is too massive, right? The drop-off is too massive to bench the player, and we'll put up with whatever weird eccentricities that the starter has in order to kind of get to a point where like the season is functional. And like in our heads, like the difference between an Impact and a Jenkins is qualifying for Worlds. And that's too huge to sacrifice, right? In terms of like play quality. That is why you will get situations where players are continuously, habitually problematic, but do not get benched until the end of the season, and then they come out. So people saying that this wouldn't have come up if they had made Worlds. Yes, you are absolutely correct. It wouldn't have come up because to them, it would have been worth it. It would have been worth all the problems if they had made Worlds. That is why it doesn't come up, for sure. It's not like, oh, they're holding it over his head in like some grudging way, waiting to like whip it out and completely ruin him because they're just mad and they wouldn't have done it. No, it's not calculated. It's just literally this is how they think. Anyway, that aside, because I have the opinion that you should not like drag a former teammate, you should not drag like a player, I think airing this information, because you can almost guarantee that this information was leaked by someone from C9, who has an investment, especially if there's a lawsuit, a potential lawsuit, who has an investment in this case going C9's way, from an organizational standpoint, I find that despicable, because you are basically torturing a player's reputation publicly and career to get out of his contract. That's the part I have issues with, right? Because it's like, if you ask me as a prospective employer or coach of JoJo, I will give you my honest recommendation privately, right? I am fine doing that. That you should do that, right? Publicly, you tank his value like drastically. People are saying, but JoJo will get a team no matter what. And that's probably true, but he'll probably have like significantly less salary, have fewer offers, fewer prospects because of this, right? Because of this blow up. And that's the part that I really dislike, because it's like your public value does matter. Players do get affected by what people say about them on social media. Like, they are human beings, right? That's the part that like really pisses me off and really irritates me. It's like, regardless of whether this is true or not, that's a big deal. The other thing is, like, again, health implications. If there was a health-related issue, this could completely destroy C9. You know, like, this is a big deal. So, yeah, it's kind of my rant. It's just like, I think the malicious thing is basically publicly burning someone. I don't necessarily think and like actually damaging their career prospects. I don't necessarily think the malicious thing is like holding it over his head, because I assume that they talked to him about it if it happened, right? So yeah, that's kind of my TLDR on the situation and the state of LCS and how people think about the LCS. Do I think that's problematic? Yes, absolutely. And I think players like APA, who maybe took some time but managed to get to a point where now they are all pro mid laners, are a good counter argument to the state of the LCS and to benching and to like why it should now be considered possible to bench players for problematic reasons. The counter argument to that is you then have to think of an LCS team as a long-term investment that your systems will carry you next year and that will be worth it. And more orgs are like, maybe this is the last good year, right? Like maybe this is the last good year of LCS, maybe this is the last good year of competition, maybe we're out next year, maybe Riot completely tanks the entire league, maybe Riot takes us down to 4 teams next year. No one knows because it keeps happening like this. So you're not going to convince any LCS owner that investing in a young talent for next year is viable over going to Worlds this year. You're just not, it's not going to happen. I hope it changes, right? I hope we get to see more of that. I think it would be really good. But right now, this is kind of the state of how LCS teams operates. And yeah, that's my rant on the situation. So, yay.
Also, the only like capstone I'll add to this is to harp in to like hone in on this wouldn't come out and like if C9 had made Worlds. This happens in traditional sports all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like where it's like obviously the LCS ecosystem is significantly smaller, and additionally part of the issue, as we've been talking about, like systemic revenue issues with LoL esports as a whole, with how the franchising system has been set up, how you can't compare it to traditional sports franchising because, again, we don't have broadcast rights. We don't have so many other things. We don't even have, to compare it to the NHL, which I would say is the least popular of the like 4 major sports in North America, because literally the only people who care about hockey are like people from the Northeast, like me, people from like Minnesota or Michigan, and then Canadian. Is that even in that case, the vast majority of their revenue, or a higher percentage of their revenue, then comes from like venues and ticket sales and like things that are related to the live event experience, which we also are cutting down on in LoL esports, and also hasn't been a thing that has made LoL esports money for a lot of reasons that are applicable in traditional sports and not applicable in esports.
Some valid, some
and so
not.
I think, yeah, I do think it's worth pointing out that this is like not an esports specific issue in terms of having a player who hands are so good that you like any sort of like we're comparing your behavior to how good your hands are. And a lot of the time, how good you are at something is going to negate a lot of things of your favorite players that you might not even know about in traditional sports until it becomes in some way unprofitable for people to ignore those things. So I just wanted to point that out as a traditional sports enjoyer, I guess, and also to point out the fact that because esports itself is so much smaller scale, and because we don't have as many revenue streams coming in to a franchise system, this is exacerbated a lot. I just wanted to point that out. Because now, actually, here, I'll do this transition. We're going to go to the LPL.
Nice.
Where the first thing we're going to talk about is EDG Aaron. EDG is going to come up later, too, in some more drama.
Emily keeping me honest so I don't just talk about this ad nauseum for the next, 3 hours anyway.
Well, there's also, for me, I don't want to keep speculating about it until something else actually comes up. That's more.
I guess one thing I will say before we close is these are ways that you can have good work ethic while being late. Stay up late and study matchups. Practice 1v1s. Talk to your teammates after practice about how they want to play certain coordinated maps. Watch VODs with your teammates in your own time. Make sure, even if if you're late to meetings, if you're still showing up and you're willing to go along with whatever your team decided. Um, teaching your rookie teammates how to play out a certain situation on your own time, calling your coach and making sure that in the middle of the night, making sure draft is good. There are a million ways that you can be effective and have a good work ethic while being slightly late every day. Anyway, sorry. Now that I've said that, hopefully we can move on. EDG Aaron, LPL is dying.
The LPL is dying. So I think to anyone who has paid attention to LPL, especially over the past year, I feel like this isn't going to be a huge shock because some of the things that he mentions were already part of the initial statement in terms of reasoning for the LPL to change their format for this year, right? Where they were like, we want to make the most of our home venues, because speaking of home venues, the LPL is the only league that is kind of geolocated, and I say kind of because not every team has a venue. And the way that the system kind of evolved, from my understanding and talking to LPL fans, was a lot less about like if you are a fan of, say, WE, you're going to go to every home game in Xi'an. It's more that if you are a fan of another team who's visiting Xi'an and you live in Xi'an, you're like, oh, EDG is playing WE. It becomes more of like a roadshow environment, right? Where you're relying on fans around China to be able to just go to like the closest venue that's near to them, is kind of what it ended up being, as opposed to something where you'd look at the North American franchise system where you have really built-in fan bases because of like where you grew up, right? Literally the only reason I'm a Red Sox fan is because I grew up in Boston. The only reason I'm Bruins fan is because I grew up in Boston. And my family was fans of those teams, right? So it's a little bit different in terms of how the LPL was doing their home venues, but that was one of the big things they came out in the big switch up of their format for summer, was like, we want to make this more entertaining, which is why Fearless came through. We want to make it again so that the games are more entertaining in that we don't have as many disparate matchups. So we don't have as many like BLG versus Ultra Prime, where the discrepancy between those two teams is just so significant that like maybe people will skip out on that match because they already know it's going to be really, really one-sided. And that's why they had these two groups that people were sorted in. So like the idea is, even if two teams are bad, if they're equal in skill, that's going to mean for a more entertaining experience. And so EDG Aaron came out with this thing. He's talked a lot since like, we're not going to go through the whole WE-EDG split, but let's just say that Aaron has been commenting on the state of LPL for a really long time. And he basically came out and said that they have too many teams, right? There are so many players in a lot of these positions, but it feels like new up-and-coming rookies aren't coming into those positions. And some of that is actually also to do with laws passed in China as well, where they were getting a lot stricter about how whether anyone under the age of 18 can, like, how much they can practice, how much they can play games, etc. So that is also kind of affecting this. He doesn't bring it up. I'm bringing that up. But basically, 17 teams. Is the strength of the region declining? He mentions that their server is having issues getting new players in, which is something that I know Arnold from Gen G mentioned, and we talked about this previously over in Korea, where he's like, we're in a good state now, but looking down the pipeline, there's fewer and fewer players who are queuing up on the ladder for the intent of going pro. and this is also happening on the Chinese servers and the Chinese super server. He mentions that the attendance at venues for this year has been really bad, and he's not talking about EDG. He's talking about a bunch of all teams across the board, and he basically just says this is unsustainable, and if our performance at Worlds is bad, it will continue to decline. Another thing I do want to point out is, again, he doesn't bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up because I think it's very relevant. I know there was a significant drop off when Uzi retired, and then a viewership spike when he returned, and then another viewership drop off when he retired. So you do have the when you don't have as many popular players like Uzi, like the Shy not playing was also a big one for this year. And then additionally, the most popular teams in LPL did not do particularly well this year either. So the historic franchises that you have a lot of older fans that are really attached to, or even newer fans coming in who are really attached to, like EDG, gained a ton of new fans in 2021 after they won Worlds. You had the churn of players off of the teams, like Mako leaving EDG was also really big. It's also why I'd say of the teams going to Worlds, TES are the most popular team, and it's because Jackie Love and Mako are on that team. So yeah, it's he basically came out and said, "Hey, you thought esports was dying in your region. It's dying even here in China, which is the largest, just in terms of volume of fans in the world."
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked about this very briefly last episode, actually, because there was someone in chat saying, you can't say that globally League is declining. It's not declining in China. It's like, oh, it's fucking declining in China for sure. So, Aaron is not the only one echoing the sentiment. I think there's a lot of factors. One is obviously, kind of the harp on EDG themselves a bit. All of the legacy brands or big brands that have won Worlds, gone to Worlds, made big international splashes, have been at the top of the league historically. You think EDG, you think RNG, you think WE, even IG. I'm sure there are more that I'm missing here. But they basically all drastically downsized their expenditure, their salaries, and hired significantly fewer big names. So the leading brands of the league are now also, in theory, attracting fewer viewership. They're also performing worse. So you are in a position in LPL that I think is not dissimilar to how the LCS felt after Bjergsen Doublelift retired, which is now we have to rebuild brand new brands and make new stories about players. It's not as bad because obviously you had the Knight situation that's been going on, all of those players, but it is kind of similar vibes, right? So you have that element. Also, if you look at the wording on all the format changes, I was doing a deep dive that I never published because then we came out with, oh, Riot is just changing the structure of leagues and it doesn't matter. So anything that LPL does this year is probably not going to be the same, but whatever. I did the deep dive, but all the wording on the format changes are to improve viewership. We are doing this to improve viewership. If you read the Chinese, it literally says, this will bring more exciting games and higher viewership as a justification. Fearless, right? Because they said, oh, no one cares about these preceding matches in group stage. To make them more exciting, we will add viewership. And then when we go to the 2-group system, it'll be very exciting because there will be more parity. And you can also just watch the high-profile matches if you wanted to. But again, that backfired to an extent because EDG, RNG, all those teams were in the shit group. So,
Yep.
Good times. But yeah, I think that was I think a big element. The wording around it has been very, very huge. I think If you follow RNG's kind of like VP, he has a Twitter. He speaks English. He's actually pretty open about like financial struggles in the league and things like this. What is interesting is he's even said he thinks it's like publicly that he thinks it's a good strategy for RNG to collaborate more with foreign brands and interact more with Western fans because like RNG is a known brand. Well, this part is me. RNG is a known brand to Western fans, unlike a lot of LPL fans, and if they're the first to do it, they can capitalize on the markets, right? Now the drop off from what you get between the Chinese catering exclusively to the Chinese fan base and the Western audience, if you can corner the market, might not be as drastic as it was historically, right? You can collaborate with teams that people like, and so you see like a lot more activity on RNG socials. Like they meme a lot more. They're like asking for people's feedback on like in English on like merch that they'd like to see, things like that. So like that is also a product of the fact that like domestic viewership is dropping for the league, right? Anyway, a lot of my speculation on the league format changing is one, people love NBA, so China does a lot to kind of mimic NBA and the conference style. Two, the other speculation, it was that in the long term, like if leagues still built for the long term, which they don't, but in the long term, you could have a situation where, to your point, right, you could be fans of not just the team in Xi'an, but the teams in Xi'an, right? You could have 4 teams in Xi'an who basically always have their preceding matches there, right? And that could be like an experience for Xi'an for like mini fans. And then you could have 4 teams in another place. And then this would be something that could like basically improve the fan bases of the teams that are currently just all exclusively in Shanghai except for 4, right? So that's like another thing that I was thinking about. But again, it's like almost all of these things are all of the changes and all of the things that LPL has been doing is a byproduct of the fact that viewership is also declining in LPL. Viewership and revenue is also declining in LPL, and a lot of people think it's like this perfect bubble where the fans will always support it. But I mean, EDG just won Valorant, so you know there's like the new hotness there too, even if I would say gaming trends are much more sluggish in China because of the PC bang or net cafe system, as they would call it. So, yeah.
So all that being said, just to go through like just to as proof positive of what you said regarding how a lot of the legacy orgs have gone for more budget rosters, right? And they don't have as big names on them. If you look at I would say I'm not even including OMG here. It kind of hurts not to include.
Been budget for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of old OMG fans have already churned out. But like, if I'm looking at EDG, IG, RNG, and I'll throw WE in there, like the most well-known people on these rosters for EDG, like, is it Leave because of the scandal? Is it Cryan from his time on
JJ, no?
JJ, yeah, for winning World. So it's like JJ, who wasn't not the most popular EDG member when it was like, you know, the Mako team. You have IG, probably YSKM.
Yeah.
RNG, which is like the most fun I had with an RNG match this year was the one where they just role swapped a bunch of things and like Iwandi was playing jungle. It was not great. By the way,
my enjoyment of RNG games drastically. I hope Juice stays. I'm down. I don't think he is staying, but yeah.
Yeah, but we had like who is the most well-known person on this team? Like Ming, probably, but then he wasn't starting necessarily. So then you have, I guess, Huan Feng
Yeah.
as like most well-known player on that roster. And then going to WE, it's probably Fofo.
Oh, goody.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, we're going. I just went through like 4 legacy orgs, right? Who are like really, really popular, and looking at their players. And none of these players are like have the same brand names as someone like, for example, I do absolutely believe that TES is the most popular Chinese team going to Worlds this year. And it's because Jackie Love and Mako are on that team. And they are, I would say, the most popular LPL players going to the World Championship, even with like how much the international audience really loves Bin. I would say that they are probably the most popular players, and then maybe Scout as well, which I don't know if that's our transition to now talk about the other big LPL drama that EDG is involved in.
Just to preface this, because Z515 reminded me in chat, and it will come out in off season, but you might unexpectedly see these teams now that we've kind of like said, oh, they're dying and no one has money. You might unexpectedly see some of these teams spend money again for next year just because Worlds is in China, and that's like the caveat. But at the same time, it's like, again, we are thinking 1 year at a time only. And that is pretty much the situation. So, yeah.
Ready to talk about Scout drama.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of Worlds, woo!
Drama here. Okay. So, Scout might not be able to go with LNG.
Woo.
Because
in the basement without food. Not really.
Yeah, we bring back the memes. Basically, because as far as I know from talking to Linda about this, basically there was a time when EDG essentially Scout was under contract with them, and he was his either like agent or his management were shopping him around while he was still contracted to EDG. So although he ended up on LNG, this was something that came out a while ago, I think, and kind of just faded to the background because there weren't any, as far as I know, new updates with it. I know there was a time when people were like, is he going to be able to play on LNG? And he was. So I think people kind of forgot maybe that this happened. I actually forgot that it could be a problem until recently.
Even though we talked about it on the show.
I know, because my brain is fried. But yeah, so basically now they have in the background still been involved in a legal dispute over this. And because of this, EDG has essentially placed because he's involved in a current legal dispute, Scout has a travel ban where he presumably, again, this is all like allegedly, cannot leave the country, which means that he would not be able to go to Worlds with LNG. Presumably, I guess, unless EDG permitted it or they found a workaround, etc. I know there was a more recent thing that came out from one of the EDG managers that I'm reading off of LOL Context Sean's Twitter, where it's basically an EDG manager came out on stream and said that Scout knew about these travel restrictions in April, but he didn't inform LNG, the team. Mm-hmm. So it's a whole mess. And now people are kind of speculating as to like who would be the mid laner to replace Scout. Looking at what I guess people are stalking Doinby, Yagao, and Rookie's like solo queue accounts to see if any of them would potentially be able to step in. I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no idea what's going to happen, but it's very up in the air right now as to whether Scout will be able to attend Worlds with LNG because of this.
So I am a lawyer. No, I'm not. But I'm gonna talk about some legal things amateurly, which is that. So first of all, like EDG delayed the court case last year for world stuff, and obviously it's like super unpopular if this goes through. But the problem is if they've already delayed it once, it actually makes it harder to do again. The other issue is that if the court date is set, there's paperwork you can file based on like what I have researched that delays it, but because Scout kind of like lagged on filing it or notifying LNG, the turnaround time is now a problem on that for like changing court dates and things like this. So like again, expecting gamers to operate on the time constraints of the normal world just basically never works. But so that's like two things that I've heard based on like doing research. The other element of it that is somewhat interesting is I guess like in exploring. LNG have been told if they want to borrow a mid laner, it is unlikely that they can borrow from top 6 teams in LPL. So that's also a very interesting one because a lot of the favorites are like Rookie, etc. So he would not be able to do it. But they could get someone like
Doinby.
Yeah, Doinby or like UCal, I don't know, whatever. Someone that they could in theory want. Trying to think who would be the best option.
I think Doinby would just be a banger.
It would just be entertaining, right? But
wait, they can't do top 6 because I was gonna say you could get Shanks.
Yeah, they can't get Shanks if they can't do top 6.
Yeah, that sucks. Because Shanks would actually be. He's had a really good split. Well, then your options would be like Cryan, Nenny, Angel, Vikla, Tingyuan, Yukai, Yukao, like you already mentioned, Fofo. I say Doinby. If Scout can't make it, Doinby, it's your time.
Yukai! Yukai goal. Anyway, I'm down. Yeah, so
thank you for adding that context because I did not know that about the top 6 teams.
I don't know if it's like confirmed, but that has been kind of like one thing that I've read from Weibo is that they have been allegedly told that. Again, a lot of things on Weibo are allegedly discussed.
Yeah.
But that is like a potential speculation that they could not get top 6. So, yeah.
I feel like we need to put allegedly in the title of this episode.
Allegedly.
Because a lot of it is just us talking out of our asses about law stuff that we don't know.
We are not lawyers. That is the better title. Disclaimer, we are not lawyers. Wait, what if
I don't really have
results? Why don't we just sign Faker? All right.
Perfect. Unironically, T1 is one of the most popular teams in China right now.
They're one of the most popular teams everywhere, pretty much. So yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to comment on this except bringing it up because I'll be like both of us will be following it. Obviously, we both care about the LPL a lot. I think everyone's kind of holding their breath in terms of like what is LPL performance going to look like at Worlds anyway. So this is another kind of hiccup en route to that. And now I think it's time for my least favorite part of the episode, just KT.
Yeah, since we talked about Worlds and who will be there and who will not be there, obviously KT will be there. So if you're sad that Scout is not going to be there,
My
then
God.
you can be happy to hear that KT will be there. They just 3-0'd Fear X today. They're going to Worlds. They're
No, they're
going
not.
to Worlds. CSKT Finals. It's going to happen. Mark your calendars, whatever fucking day it is. I don't know, man. But the. The yeah, I mean they 3-0 today, and obviously T1 are in the bracket, and like if you guys don't remember, Emily and I had a conversation where we discussed if T1 didn't go to Worlds, who would go to Worlds instead, and I, as the most faithful and loyal KT fan on the episode, said that KT would make Worlds over T1, but we get it to come to a head. It's tomorrow, right? So
It's like tonight. It's at
Yeah.
11 p.m. I think, or not Eastern. Oh my gosh,
Pacific.
Pacific.
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, KT did 3-0 last night. It was interesting.
Woo! Jin.
I think yeah. They played two, like, I guess I would classify them as like pick comps, right? With the Lilia Yone Jin kind of setup, and then an engaged support from Beryl and Rel and Poppy, and Perfect on the Cassante. I do not think so. It's weird in watching this matchup with T1 specifically. KT have a lot of issues as a team, but T1 also have a lot of issues as a team. So if I do think T1 will actually win out, because I think KT can be a little bit more one-dimensional at times. And I think a lot of the mistakes that they made in the series with FearX that they kind of mitigated through their team fighting, they won't necessarily be able to do that against T1. However, if I'm looking at the way these two teams match up, I see T1, a team that has really struggled to, in the current meta, play around, like, I think they're still really uncomfortable with Ziggs comps. I think in looking at how they matched up against DK, they had some games where I know people are gonna point out like Zeus underperformance, but I also think with the MF setup and kind of how you want her to be super strong in lane and then rotate her around the map, I don't think they look as comfortable with that either. And then BDD Faker is going to be interesting, because I feel like these are two mid laners that we've talked about all year, want to be on very specific champions, and their teams are going to do their utmost to make sure that they are on those specific champions, because it gives them the highest key to like victory. But yeah, I think when it comes down to it, I slightly favor T1 because I do find that KT are a little bit more one-dimensional. But I also think it'll be interesting to see where Ziggs and MF end up fitting in these drafts, if they end up going through, or if KT are going to continue to focus on this kind of like long-range Jin setup with the Lilia and then BDD playing Yone, because I do think BDD has looked more comfortable on Yone than Faker, especially in their like recent matches. So it's actually like, and I know everyone's going to be like, well, Emily, you're a KT fan, so you're just going to shit on KT, which is also true. But I do think it's going to be an interesting matchup between these two teams, because they have, because they both have a lot of weaknesses that they have to overcome, right, in this matchup. So we'll see. Again, I'm favoring T1. I think they will be the fourth team to go to Worlds. But yeah, that's happening tonight. Kelsey, as the resident KT super fan, your analysis of what's going to happen in regionals tonight?
I mean, I actually really like the long range comps. I think they're underplayed, and when you can play it well, they're super OP. The problem is most people can't play them well. It's debatable whether or not what we saw today was KT playing them well.
They do think KT played them well.
But I do think like the Yone points is a good one because I think Yone is unironically good into like literally everything that either team can play except LeBlanc. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on the KT train. It's gonna be Pyoshik Gep. No, it's not gonna be Pyoshik Gep. But I still think actually part of why Yone is good for KT is KT's biggest strength is still grub usage, in my opinion. I think that they understand like how to play fast on side trades with grubs, and Yone is super good for that. So is like long range wave clear on Jhin. Again, they don't play it like super well, but they like everyone globally grub usage is atrocious, and I think KT is still like better at it than most in terms of like understanding hard shifts, especially from behind, which I also think like KT, we've talked about this before, but I do think KT has like a good matchup into T1, so I'm sticking to the KT train. We're riding it all the way into the station. Let's go.
On the T1 side, we will be proven right or wrong in less than 24 hours. So.
Oh, also, I forget who said it on X, but the fun fact is that if KT beat T1, T1 will have been eliminated by the DRX roster in their last 3 series.
Wow. Actually, yeah, that makes sense. Pyoshik, Barrel, and Deft are all on the team.
Yeah, and they played Zeka and Kingen, so banger. Well, that was fun. I'll try to get the episode out today because, again, we're talking about LCK Finals, which means that, unfortunately, for coffee subscribers, it's not going to be early again. But, yeah, we are not lawyers. I am a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Anyway.
I used to want to be a lawyer when I was a kid.
Oh, nice.
I would, like, argue to I would defend my brother, and I would, like, become his lawyer whenever he did something bad. Yeah, it was a good time. I had a good time, except then he would like open his mouth and like prove my argument wrong, and then I stopped defending him at the age of like 8.
So yeah, you're basically simulating what it's like to actually be a lawyer already at the age of 8. Speaking of, when are you gonna change your bio?
Hey, I don't even know. I haven't. Are you talking about my Twitter bio?
Yeah.
Why do I need to change it? From being a KT fan or what?
No, from analyst to caster. What the fuck? Let's get on that.
Yeah,
come on.
You cast.
Yeah. Let's go. Okay. Anyway, Anyway,
I was like, wait. When was the last time I even changed this thing? And it was like, not anywhere recently.
All right.
Anytime recently.
Oh, also, you said you were a Peanut fan earlier, but I think you're a Peanut's mother fan, actually, in reality.
True.
I think your pin tweet is still that article, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like one of my favorite articles I ever wrote, so it's staying up there. Also, as a random aside, one of my favorite things was when they were showing all of the HLE moms. That was very cute.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for those of you who don't know, one of Emily's probably best performing articles ever. I think it was one of your best performing articles. She went to the restaurant where that Peanut's family owns, or Peanut's mom owns, and did a really nice interview with his mom. So that's why
really nice. It meant a lot to me as well.
Yeah. So all right. You can find it on her pinned tweet on her X accounts. Anyway, that is it for this episode. We will see you guys soon, and have a good one.